this isn't the first time that books have been banned, right? Black people as an entire race were banned from reading. There was a pastor here because Missouri was the last state to end this ban on Black children either going to school or getting an education. But while that ban was in place, there was a pastor, his last name was Meacham. He realized by paying attention to the laws that he could open a school on the Mississippi River because the river was federally regulated and out of the jurisdiction of the state. And so he created a freedom school on the river so that kids could learn how to read, that people can learn how to read. So as much as there's a lot of fear right now about what to do when books are getting banned, people are getting deported, I think it's an incredible time to learn and lean on history to figure out how people have been responsive to repression because it has happened before. And I think that that's going to be our strength and our guide.
Hello and welcome to the Know Your Rights Camp podcast. My name is Dee Barbadillo, and today we are joined by Derecka Purnell. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi. Derecka is a widely published writer, organizer, and movement lawyer dedicated to love and liberation. She's the author of Becoming Abolitionist, Police, Protests, and the Pursuit of Freedom, and currently working on her second book. So, a lot of your work is deeply rooted in love and liberation, as you mentioned. How do you define these concepts?
Love. How do I define love? I think love is when you want better for a community, for yourself, for a partner, for a family member, and you're willing to sacrifice and work towards making that what makes them come alive possible. And so I think that unfortunately, because we live under so much oppression and we get taught love essentially in a shallow way, like just about feelings or about what you're able to do for someone. But ultimately, I think love is about allowing us to practice our agency and to do that in ways that are just. And I think about liberation. I think about like what are the best possible terms for people to disagree on that allow us to pursue what we dream of, right? And so let's say that, for example, like there are things I really love to do. There's ways like I really love to spend my time, right? And there's one way I can think about how I want to spend my time. I would dance all day. I would talk about basketball all day. I would probably garden a lot. There are these things I would do with my time, right? And I can think of that as liberation. I think liberation is actually what's also required of me that helps other people be free too. And so maybe part of my liberation is what I do in my free time, how I contribute, how I live the life I want to live. But it also means that I am responsible and accountable to other people. And my responsibility and my accountability to them enables them to do the things that make them come alive too. So I find them very, very closely related.
I see. So it's redefining these concepts beyond the way we see them in what are perhaps shallow ways.
Yeah, because I think when people think liberation or freedom, they think, oh, I can do whatever I want or we can do whatever we want. But I think, and I've been thinking a lot about this word agency and responsibility. And so it's how do we do the things that we want and also the things that we need to do to be accountable to other people. Like it's some relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, making these words more active as opposed to making them verbs rather than just nouns, essentially.
Yeah.
So it seems like you're reimagining these concepts or at least redefining them. How, in your book, do you reimagine justice?
Yeah, so I try to push back on this idea that justice is an outcome. And so when a police or a cop rather kills a kid on the street and people are demanding, let's send that cop to jail, let's send that cop to prison, and that cop goes in front of a jury and that cop, let's say, gets convicted and then goes to prison, we say justice was served. We're thinking about justice as an outcome of a legal result. But let's say that cop gets off, like most cops do. Let's say they get off. Justice has not been served. I think what makes me frustrated about limiting the idea of justice to a legal outcome is that the legal system where that takes place is unjust. It's a fundamentally unjust system. Right. It's not built for just outcomes. It's not built for just relationships. So I've really have been pushed to think differently around justice from indigenous communities all across the world, from abolitionists, from slavery abolitionists to current prison and police abolitionists, to think about justice as a set of relationships between people, between our communities, between us and the earth, right? Is it possible for one community to get justice if it's harmful to another community, right? Is it possible for us to secure things that we think are just? Like, I've been thinking a lot about home ownership, private home ownership. Private home ownership is something that's seen aspirational for a lot of Black communities, mainly because Black people have been denied it in the United States for so long. And one of the ways that we talk about eliminating a Black-white wealth disparity between Black people and white people is through home ownership. But the more that we learn about home ownership, everyone having their individual tracts of land, the more we understand it's actually horrible for the earth. It's like wreaking havoc on the planet for everyone to have their own lawn, their own water hose, their own, plastics and that make up the size of the house. And could there be something that's justice or justice oriented for Black people that's causing harm to the earth, right? So it's like, well, how can we think about more just ways of living together, of having more opportunity for cooperative lifestyles rather than living in a way that's contributing to destruction? And so I think justice is about a set of relationships and a set of conditions rather than a specific outcome.
You touched shortly on it when you were redefining justice, but when you think about abolition and abolitionist work, I'm pretty sure there are a lot of misconceptions or ways of thinking about it that make it hard for people to understand. So how would you describe the abolitionist fight to someone using the way that I love, the way that you're redefining all of these terms that we thought we knew?
Yeah, well, I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not personally.
For yourself, at least for yourself.
Redefining the terms. I think what's beautiful about a lot of these words is they come from struggle. They come from debates and experimentations over time, right, and ideas. And I feel very lucky to be an inheritor of that struggle. And so I think one of the easiest ways I tend to talk about abolition is easy because people like Angela Davis are in critical resistance, and Rachel Herzing and Miriam Kaba, like all these incredible people who have done a lot of thinking about abolition. Ruth Wilson Gilmore. I mean, the list really goes on. But with slavery abolition, it wasn't enough to just end slavery, right? To end the institution of slavery didn't just mean that, boom, Black people are going to be free from plantations. Real abolition of slavery required the abolition of a kind of society that relied on free and forced labor, violently, in order to sustain itself. And so you had to abolish these ideas of roles. We had to abolish who could, what a plantation would be like, right? Who are overseers, like that had to be abolished. What sort of rights people had coming out of slavery, right? The forms of oppression had to be abolished. And so much remained, which is why current abolitionists today say, well, slavery wasn't fully abolished, right? All these vestiges remain. And so today, when I use the word abolition, or when I say I'm an abolitionist, I mean that we have to abolish the kind of society that could have police in prisons, right? We have to abolish the kind of society where people can harm each other in the way that they do, making people feel like we need these institutions. And ultimately, it's the end of community-based violence, carceral violence, capitalist violence, colonial violence, climate-based violence, at the same time, over time, until we achieve collective liberation. Right? Abolition is about building the kind of habits such that we can deal with and face new problems, right? Because we don't have to be burdened by the kind of problems we have now. The question is, well, what can we put in place to get there?
The idea is to understand the intersection of all of these issues, right? Create a new system. How would you encourage the youth that are at this camp to start looking around them and seeing how can we encourage them to seek these more just, not just outcomes, but this new just system, this new reality?
Oh, yeah. Well, I would encourage them to do exactly what I would encourage an adult to do, which is to either find or develop something called a political home. So, for example, I consider myself on good days a Christian.
Okay.
And I have like a church home. And my church home I view as a group of people who are responsible for making me the best like Christian I can be, which means to love my neighbor, to take care of people, to try to practice being an ethical person, to be a good caretaker, to make sure I'm connected with people who are in prisons, to make sure I'm like the best kind of communist. That's what I think of a good Christian. Like, how do we make sure that we share resources with each other? A political home does something similar. It's a group of people that you decide to be curious with, to develop ideas and experiments around what you're studying. So in your political home, it's like, hey guys, I've been really hearing people say abolish the police a lot. The news is saying that it's messed up. My grandmama kind of don't like it. Like, let's figure out what people are saying this thing really means. And in that political home, you can read together. You can debate together. The most important thing is that you're doing it together and you're deciding to show up repeatedly to grapple and wrestle and understand these concepts. What's cool about being a young person is that when I was the age of the kids in this camp, like, this was not a mainstream conversation, right? So the kind of ideas that I had about justice when I was 13, 14, 15, even 30, are completely different than the kind of ideas that I had now. And so I just think it's an incredible opportunity for people so young to start learning and trying to wrestle with these ideas. I also think it's equally important for people. I meet so many new abolitionists who are in their 60s who are just like, oh, girl, like, I didn't know this is what defund the police meant, because this is how it's talked about on this channel. But the more we connect with each other and decide to be curious together, I think it can create a lot of open doors.
That's great. I think a lot of people think protests and demonstrations are the entry point. So are you saying that beyond that this finding this political home is sort of not the better, but another thing that people can do to sort of jump into the fray?
Yeah, we absolutely need both, right? I think that the beautiful thing that protests and demonstrations allow us to do is to communicate that we condemn what's happening, right? Like, we don't want this thing to happen. We don't want ICE coming to our neighborhoods and stalking people and abducting them and making them leave the country. We don't want that. So we're going to show up and say no to that, right? That's one step, and that's an important step. And we need people to always be ready to hit the streets. People should be hitting the streets more. But then it's like, well, we're not going to stop ICE from enforcing this everywhere. So the next step from the demonstrations is, well, what is our relationship to ending a police force like ICE? And that takes education, that takes time, that takes strategy. So we need people to demonstrate. We need people to be curious and to be patient. And we need people to get organized into political homes to figure out the strategy that they need to do.
I think when people think of organizing, they think immediately of community organizing, as in the broader view, like their actual physical communities where they live. But I don't think people think that there's sort of a social community to be put together in terms of for this political education, for this political awareness. Do you have any insight into what you think helps create a good political home?
That's a great question. I think community organizing is important because ultimately it's where we live. I think base building is really important. So organizations who decide to build individual relationships with people in their neighborhood or people across the country or people across the world and decide this is our strategy together in order to increase the number of people who agree with our strategy. So base building is really important. I think cultural organizing is really important. It's like, how can we use the arts to engage people to think differently, right, about the world? So I think about someone like Aja Monet, who is an incredible poet. She's based in LA. She's originally from New York. And Aja is just able to talk about really complex topics through her poetry in a way that moves people and gets them excited about thinking about the world differently. So we need cultural organizing work, right? We need people engaging all types of organizing because different things attract different people, you know?
Here at the Know Your Rights Camp, that's why we have all these different presenters, right? Trying to help people find ways to plug in. And also there's a lot of focus on education and empowerment in different ways. What do you think are some takeaways that the youth attending should have, especially with your presentation?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Some takeaways. Take everything away and then some.
Sure, yeah.
What are some other good takeaways? I think right now there are a lot of people who are rightfully afraid of the Trump administration and how like what it means in terms of the education, like quite literally education within schools, what students are able to read, what knowledge they're able to access. And I think that we can learn from history, which is the presentation I'm doing, is that this isn't the first time that books have been banned, right? Black people as an entire race were banned from reading. And rather than just sort of go along with it, there were courageous people who said, well, we're going to learn and fight for our education secretly and privately. You know, there was a pastor here because Missouri was the last state to end this ban on Black children either going to school or getting an education. But while that ban was in place, there was a pastor, his last name was Meacham. He realized by paying attention to the laws that he could open a school on the Mississippi River because the river was federally regulated and out of the jurisdiction of the state. And so he created a freedom school on the river so that kids could learn how to read, that people can learn how to read. So as much as there's a lot of fear right now about what to do when books are getting banned, people are getting deported, I think it's an incredible time to learn and lean on history to figure out how people have been responsive to repression because it has happened before. And I think that that's going to be our strength and our guide.
This is one of those cases where unfortunately history is repeating, but maybe we can find ways to win again. What do you think when it comes to relying on history? How do we make sure that history stays present considering all the different ways that this administration and those in power want to erase the histories of marginalized communities?
Oh, yeah. Well, one thing that's very, very clear is that we can't just rely on formal schooling to teach each other and to teach our children, right? We have to make sure that education is present across, right, social spaces. So Know Your Rights Camp is so important because here's another opportunity outside of a formal school setting for kids to learn this history, for adults to learn this history. I think that's one. I think students can also take it upon themselves to like learn and to struggle and to be creative in how they respond to this moment. Because what you can't do, you can't defund a private study group.
Right.
You can't take that away. You can't regulate that, right? If groups of people are deciding, you know, to do mutual aid, to share resources, to get books together, right? It's like, well, that's something that's really important that we can do that they don't have control over, they don't have power over. So I think we have to fight and protect these intimate spaces and other ways of obtaining information, creating information, learning from people in other parts of the world, right? So there are people in Turkey, people in South America, people in West Africa who are living under authoritarianism, dictators right now, right? It's like, well, people are still learning. How are those people still learning? So I think in addition to looking to history, it's really important for us to look across borders and to really be in struggle and to solidarity with people who are trying to learn under oppressive conditions.
Speaking of your work across other countries, how has that influenced your approach to organizing?
Oh my goodness. In so many ways. And so when I was growing up in St. Louis, the neighborhood where I lived was like half African American, half East African. And St. Louis was also a major refugee resettlement site. So all of the white people I grew up here were white Bosnian Muslims. So the first time I started interacting with white Americans, I was like, oh, this is different. Like, this is a little different. And so I think having friends quite literally from all over the world, friends from Iraq and Iran, I mean, people who have just seen war and violence and, lost parents, lost children, it really shaped my worldview. And when was I? I guess I was in my mid-20s the first time I left the country because we were so poor. We just didn't have money to really, we didn't own a car. We didn't have money to do anything. But when I went to law school, I remember my kid and I, we both got our passports the same year. And I started learning from students who were at University of Cape Town in South Africa and Witwatersrand in Johannesburg and University of Amsterdam. And I was listening to those students' demands and how they were coming to those demands. And they were saying things like, look, comrades, right now, our education costs money. And because our education costs money, there are people who are poor who can't access it. There are courses whose language, it's primarily English, and that's not our indigenous language. We need to fight for a fully decolonized university. We need to fight for a fully democratically controlled university. We need to fight for control of the land. And I was like, oh man, I'm just trying to get like another black professor. Like, I didn't even know that like fighting for democratic control
that it could of go the that land. Far.
Yes, I'm like, it blew my mind. It made me realize that, oh yeah, the world truly is ours. And we don't have to negotiate for a win here or one more diversity hire there or one more class on this here. That we really can think differently about how we live all together. So I have been truly blown away by the level of internationalist organizing. And when I look to the people in history that I admire, I realize like, oh yeah, they were internationalists. Ella Baker, we know about her work with SNCC, but we don't talk about her work with Puerto Rico liberation or her building cooperative housing, right? We talk about the Black Panther Party, but we don't talk about their relationship to Palestine. We don't talk about, or let me say we don't talk about, because I actually hate when people don't talk about when they say that. We don't talk about it enough. We need more.
In the same way.
Yes, we need more. We need to pay more attention to and learn from a lot of our heroes' deep internationalist struggles and commitments. People like Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was a part of a committee called We Charge Genocide, who went to the United Nations to say, look at how Black people are being treated in the United States. Look at how police are treating Black people in the United States. This is a genocide. Right? Why would they use the United States as a world forum? Right? So I think there's just so much rich history about how we learn to connect with people in other conditions.
I've got to say, it's refreshing because I think for a lot of us who are here, a lot of people tuning in, there's a lot of conversations about social justice, about abolition. And I think it's hard, especially now when it seems like the world is resistant to radical change. So how do you stay hopeful, and what advice do you give to those feeling discouraged?
Oh, wow. I don't think you're going to like my answer.
I don't
think you're going to like my answer because I have been trying to move away from what makes me hopeful.
Okay.
And I have been trying to ask myself, what is required of me? Because what is required of me tends to remain more consistent than my hope.
Okay.
And right now, I don't feel a lot of hope. And I think that's okay. But I know what's required of me. I know that I'm required to organize. I know that I'm required to write. I know I'm required to parent and be a good neighbor and to be a good partner. I know I'm required to teach. All these things have to continue. Sometimes it's easier to do that. Sometimes it is not. And so my relationship to hope, I think, is an important one. But my relationship to my responsibility is what convicts me.
And maybe that's the lesson to be learned today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For more information about the Know Your Rights Camp, please check us out at knowyourrightscamp.org. Until next time.